We're now joined by the party leader for the Amani National Congress, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Vice President Musalia Mudavadi, popularly known as the guy who came up with NASA How. Happy to have you on NTV.
Thank you.
ODM is basically crossed over from one side of the aisle to the other. We saw Wiper Party sign an agreement with Jubilee Party. What is the state of NASA coalition?
Well, I'm the last man standing. Let me put it that way. But basically, NASA is not doing well. It's not. Because legally it stands. Nobody has exited formally from NASA. But in terms of the cohesion and pursuing what we stood for when the coalition was formed, I think NASA has veered off that course as we speak. And but I said that if we are supposed to be leaders, we must also respect the law. And that is why, at a personal level, I have maintained that you cannot be in two coalitions at the same time. Because legally, the NASA coalition document still sits with the Registrar of Political Parties. And none of the constituent parties has exited. So if you are to ask me, I really don't know what Kalonzo signed with Jubilee. Because to date, I don't think it has been filed with the Registrar of Political Parties. So I have no access to the document to know what was the framework in which they worked on it. Jubilee, ODM on the other hand has said that they will work on the basis of the handshake cooperation. That is the message they have given. Kanu's situation was different. Kanu was not part of NASA, but Kanu was not in any coalition at all. So to them, they signed a coalition agreement with Jubilee and they registered it with the Register of Political Parties. So for me as ANC, or for Kenya for that matter, if we want to enter into a separate coalition, we must exit the NASA coalition. Otherwise, we are not then living in accordance with the law.
We now have this clamor over a referendum around the BBI. Is the issue legislation or failure to implement the Constitution as envisioned?
You see, it's more of failure to implement the Constitution, in my view. No Constitution is perfect. And from time to time, yes, there'll be need to amend some aspects of a Constitution. But I have my own concerns as a Kenyan, because if you look at the history of Kenya when it comes to constitutional amendments and the clamor for constitutional amendments, how come it's a coincidence that this clamor always comes when a regime is coming to its sunset days or when a new regime is about to come in? So don't you see that it is always occurring around a transitional period? It's a pattern. The political class are looking at it, what can we do to give me a safe exit, or for the ones who are coming in, what can we do to give me a consolidated entry point? And this is the issue. Are we amending the Constitution of Kenya because it is for the people, or is it because it's for the political class?
So are you saying this clamor for change to the Constitution is more about the powers that be and less about the people of Kenya?
I think that is the pattern that we have seen in this country. Let me not mince our words. Whether we will amend the Constitution or not, you cannot run away from that fact. Why don't we talk about amending the Constitution the moment you take power. Hasn't it ever occurred to you that it is never at the beginning of the term that somebody says we want to amend the Constitution? It is always towards the end. Ask yourself why.
So what do you think this particular clamor is about?
It's the same game around the political class. What has been coming out through the BBI? At the end of the day, the debate around the BBI has not focused more on how to implement the gender rule. The submissions and whether the media did it deliberately or not, but all the publicity has been about sharing positions. To the extent that people are not talking about anything else around the Constitution, they start talking about government of national unity. What does that mean? Embedded in there is about sharing of power. They start talking about, do we need to have prime ministers, 1, 2, or 3? What is that all about? It's all about sharing of power. They're not talking about as forcefully about the need to deal with increased resources to the counties. Right now, our budget is 3 trillion. This standoff in the Senate is about 316 billion shillings. 10% of the whole budget. But look at the division that it's almost causing in this country. Because people are asking the very basic question. In this cow that you have slaughtered, you are giving the counties the hoofs, and maybe the legs, or part of the legs, hoofs, and maybe the head. But the main cow remains at the national government. But look at the bitterness that is emanating over the 316 billion only. So this debate about equitable resources is going to be there for a long time. The Constitution talks about the need for equity, the need for affirmative action, for prudent resources, management of resources and all that. It's all embedded in the Constitution when you talk of governance issues. I think the next level of debate must be that it's not just this, it's also a question of what about this huge chunk of resources? Who is debating this one?
The timing of the calls for these changes to the law, you said, is suspicious. But the issues that need to be fixed, how would you recommend we go about them?
I think fixing is always a question of when is the right environment. And sometimes you must create broad consensus before you rush into certain things. I have a lot of sympathy with the Kenyan people now, because we are reeling from the effects of COVID. We are reeling from an economy that is depressed. We are now in a global environment where even our friends or benefactors may be reluctant to help us at this point in time because they are facing similar crises as a result of the COVID. So if there was going to be foreign assistance or interventions on certain things, it may not be forthcoming for a very long time. So we have challenges. Now, we must be sensitive. Schools have been closed. Parents are worried about their children. We can see hospitals are suffering from critical supplies. The medical staff are not getting what they want. In the US, you're talking of Black Lives Matter. Here, Kenyans' lives matter. Would you go and subject people now, with these rising cases of COVID, to a campaign mode? Would you? And is it a constitutional deadline? Elections are in Tanzania because it's a constitutional deadline. Elections are in the US because it's a constitutional requirement. Our constitutional requirement for elections is 2022, not 2020. But be that as it may, did Yatani provide money for the referendum? He didn't. Why? I don't know.
As far as what you're saying, Kenyan lives matter, are you proposing, for instance, this whole debate around changes to the constitution, should we shelve it for post-2022?
Let us be sensitive to people's lives. Uhuru's term ends in 2022. Uhuru's term is not ending in 2020. So, let us help each other. Let us help all Kenyans. And we leaders should lead from the front. Let us figure out how to deal with the COVID pandemic. And let us figure out how people will put food on their tables for their families during this crisis. Let's figure out the thousands who have lost their jobs. What are we doing? How are they surviving? I'll tell you a funny one. How many other cases could be? I'll not mention the name of the MP. But he called me and he said, "Do you know what has happened?" I told him, "No, what has happened, my good friend?" And he says, "On my wife's M-Pesa, she's receiving now twice 1,000 shillings stipend on her M-Pesa as COVID funds." And he said, "I am an MP. But my wife is receiving the stipend that is supposed to go to the needy for COVID funds." So he said he'll have to go public on it. I'll not mention his name. That is his prerogative. But here he is, telling me that we are the ones who have legislated. We are the ones who said that the vulnerable should be the ones to be supported during this crisis. So he was saying, can you imagine the impact in the public if it goes out that my wife has been a recipient of COVID funds? Does she fall within the category of the most needy? How many other cases could be happening in that?
That are similar to that. Which leads me to my next question. You were in the finance docket. President Uhuru Kenyatta was also at one point in the finance docket. How differently would you manage the economy in light of COVID-19?
I think that is that might be speculative at this point in time because...
Are there any recommendations you could make?
Well, yes, my first recommendation is that just focus on dealing with the COVID crisis. I would advise him, don't be distracted with too many other political activities. Just focus on stabilizing the economy and making sure priorities are right. Let us suspend any mega projects where feasibility studies have not been done. Let us suspend any mega procurement that is not an emergency kind of situation. Divert the resources to the most critical areas. That would be my advice to him. And I would be surprised if he's not seized with it already.
Okay, you mentioned the needy. And around this debate that has been around BBI, something that's come up is dynasties and hustlers. That those who argue you're a dynasty man. And therefore, are not in a position to relate to the hustler's plight. What do you say to those people?
It's very cheap and divisive. It's an argument that should be discarded very fast. You're trying to create an election topic. What would stop you from saying, let us have an election where we figure out between the Christians and the Muslims, or between the pagans and non-pagans? Why do you want to go that route? Poverty is not something to be proud of. I want to be able to lead this country sometime in future because one of the targets is to fight poverty. What did we say when we started our independence? Kupigana na umaskini, poverty, ujinga, ignorance, na ugonjwa. Let us not try and convert a state of somebody having been deprived as a state for political competition. It is wrong. We should not allow that to go on. Let us debate on whether my policies are conducive to job creation or not. Let us figure out whether my policies are those that will stamp out corruption or not. Provide health services or not. Make sure that education is there for all and quality education. That is what the debate should be. Being poor should never be made to look like it's a permanent position. We all strive to take our children to school so that they can have the skills and the knowledge to grow out of poverty. You don't take them there to become what they are carelessly calling dynasties. Kenya is not a monarchy. It is not. And the constitution that we are talking about does not recognize a monarchy. I don't know your background. I don't know your parents' background. You have no idea what my parents' background is. But for purposes of record, I would refer you to my book. I would refer you to my book, Rising Above the Storms of Passion. Go and look at it. But in case somebody cannot read the book, let me give you an example. Who was my father? My father was somebody born in then Kakamega in Western. His father, whom I never saw, that is my grandfather, died in a loose gold mine where they were doing this panning of, digging in 1934 for a livelihood. He went into that hole and he was buried there when my father was 9 years old. They were peasants. They were rural people. In his own way, he struggled, and he was the eldest sibling. I didn't know he would be my father, but there it is. But surely, because he was my father, he himself having grown through difficult times, having lost his father at 9. So what do I become? Do I become a dynasty? How many generations do we have between him and me? Fallacious arguments.
So you're saying there's not that much distance between yourself and the so-called hustlers, that you're able to relate to the issues that they're dealing with?
I want to make it very clear that I will not fall into the trap of calling people hustlers and dynasties. I totally refuse to fall prey to that argument or that categorization, because in the circumstances that we are talking about, it is divisive and it is not healthy for the people of Kenya to engage in that. Let us work to achieve a Kenya where, as we said, the rule of law applies to everybody. Opportunities abound for everybody. And let us fight poverty together.
Another juicy topic over this COVID period has been this elusive Luhya Unity. When people use the term elusive, do you buy into that argument?
I think for now the topic is there because we are approaching an election cycle and people are looking at the numbers of the people who may have their roots in Western Kenya and trying to see how they can capitalize on those numbers. That is one thing. So they will tend to argue that the people of that area are divided, they're not united, and so forth. But I always say, with time, this will be an argument behind us. It is an argument that is put forth because people want to try and categorize us and what have you. But the flip side of it, Olive, I'm a Luhya and I'm proud to be one. I cannot change that. But I'm also Kenyan. But I want to ask you this. If a community has learned to vote without ethnic biases, would that be a community that is celebrated in a country for patriotism and nationalism, or a community that is vilified? If I can vote for Uhuru, or I can vote for Raila, or I can vote for Daniel Arap Moi, or I can vote for Kibaki, because I've seen a positive something in what they're articulating, should I be vilified for that? Should I be branded as being divided because I have voted for these people over time? Then I ask you, have they ever voted for me? So who has upheld the Constitution more than anybody else?
So it's not necessarily a negative thing, it should be the direction we head towards.
It should be the direction. It is a strength that people are refusing to realize and acknowledge. That is why we're having these very hostile debates around the resource allocation in the Senate. The day we shall now be able to vote without ethnic hang-ups is the day that Kenya will have become Kenya.
This sharing out of revenue, either between the national and county governments or between the county governments, has proven to be a very contentious issue. Year in, year out, we see councillor governors moving to court, delaying in release of funds. There always seems to be some contention. Long term, how do we address that challenge?
Ultimately, is when you have a sound economy, it's very important. And a sound economy, and then commitment to implement the Constitution. I think this is what we need to look at. When I talk of a sound economy, for instance, I'll come back to my famous issue which I've constantly warned against, and people took it for granted, but now it's with us. Public debt. right? Public debt is a big problem. And if we don't resolve it, the share that will go to county governments will dwindle. And the share that will remain at national government will also dwindle. And the blame game will heighten. Minister Yatani presented his budget. He says that his target is to raise 1.6 trillion from the local revenues through the KRA. He then also submits to Parliament that under the Consolidated Fund, there are constitutional obligations, because the first charge on the Constitution is usually on the Consolidated Fund. And inside there is debt. And you know what the figure is on debt? 906 billion, so roughly just round it to 1 trillion. So his target is to collect 1.6. His constitutional obligation, whether he likes it or not, is 1 trillion. How much is being left? 600 billion. To be shared between the national government and the county governments. Kwa sababu hii 1 trillion upende usipende lazima ulipe madeni.
What do you say to those who argue that there are more developed countries in bigger debt?
I'll repeat this. Don't compare yourself to Japan, and we cannot compare ourselves to the economy of the US or Germany. It would be a wrong argument. The size of our economy, we must be prudent and careful as to how we borrow. The importance is the ability to repay back. So we must ask ourselves, what is our capacity to repay back these debts that we take? What is the interest rate? What is the time frame in which we are supposed to repay these loans? The dilemma we are facing now with Kenya is that the pressure we are getting is the loans that we took at 7% interest rate, repayable in 15 years. And they're there, whether you're talking about the Eurobond or whether you're talking about some other from certain countries. We should have concentrated on concessionary funding, where your interest rate is about 2% and your repayment is about 30 years. And there's such money out there.
If you look at the changes, for example, to the House leadership that we've seen over this COVID period, which provided a very fortuitous opportunity for the president to make those changes, President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration's argument is that the changes have been made to ensure that the president's legacy is secure, that his development agenda is pushed through. Do you think Parliament, as it stands now, is able to effectively oversight the executive?
I think our current Parliament has become captive of party interests. For instance, if you're a senator, you are there because, and I'm talking about the revenue debate, you are there because you represent people in a certain county in the Senate. They voted for you directly. They never voted for you to go and adopt a party position when it is directly against the people who voted for you.
The Mutahi Ngunyis of this world, those who say they can, read the writing on the wall as far as politics is concerned, often reduce elections to numbers. So there are those who would ask, what numbers does Musalia Mudavadi bring to the table if the Luhya community, as you said, does not vote along tribal lines?
Well, all I can say is that I hope I can persuade you to vote for me at the end of the day. That is what I want to bring on the table. I want to go beyond my ethnic community. When I become president, God willing, I'm not going to be a president of the Luhyas. I'll have to be president of Kenya. And Kenya has other heritages. So we cannot perpetually keep on saying, yes, democracy, one man, one vote is the order of the day. But what I get frustrated, because what are we inculcating in our younger people?
Do you think a parliamentary system would have addressed that? This whole numbers business?
I think it would be difficult to talk to that now, because it also depends on how constituencies would have been delineated. Okay? Because if you said we adopt a parliamentary system, but you develop a high concentration of certain constituencies or areas with constituencies, you could also have a problem. You know, there are some historical things we will have to deal with, which we will have to handle very carefully going forward. But you'll remember one of the reasons, even during the why political parties and people want to control IEBC and so forth. Apart from just what they assume can be how they can get an IEBC that is friendly for the final vote. But there are also questions that if you control the IEBC and their function includes delimitation of constituencies and boundaries, they can alter the country if they are not impartial and fair. They can alter the country to have a permanent bias when it comes to leadership. So these are very fundamental issues. Yeah, we may not exhaust them fully today, but it brings back to the question that you can see the debate around IBC. People are scared of discussing it. It's the elephant in the room. Even as we go close to, as we have debate topics around the referendum, there are questions. Have we sorted out the IEBC that is constitutionally mandated to deal with the referendum? And then we are going down to the election in 2022, and still we have not sorted it out. If you ask the IEBC, they are complaining that the resources they have been allocated, and they went public. They have been given resources only to deal with basically salaries and to settle pending bills. We have not yet resolved the issue about transmission of results fully. These are pending issues. And what was the cause of the nullification? Those issues have not yet been touched.